How would you define boundaries and limits?
You don't speak up to elders.
That's the first step, right? The awareness and being attuned to one's needs.
It's uncomfortable. I think I'll say that too, that when you haven't been that person.
Hold those boundaries even though they don't know that we need a boundary.
And I think taking a moment to reflect, whether that's journaling, praying for some people, and just thinking about where am I in life.
And today we are here with
Dr. Taide Mier-Vera.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I have a doctorate in social work. And I've been servicing the community for almost 13 years. So I was in community mental health and then I moved to being a school social worker. And most recently, I launched my private practice. So I provide virtual services for individual families, couples. I provide therapy in English and in Spanish.
And thank you for being here and welcome, Doctor. And so today we are talking about finding empowerment through setting limits and boundaries. And why is that important, Doctor?
Oh, it's absolutely important so that we live fulfilling lives, that we know what we like and what we don't like, and that we actually share that with others.
And how would you define boundaries and limits? Like, is there a difference?
I think there is. So boundaries are more of the what surrounds me. So what I like, that's in my area, and then limits are draw this line, like don't cross this line.
Okay. And I think you said like within, right?
Right,
Boundaries
within,
is
right,
within
yeah.
and limits is more like, like this is the limit that I'm.
Where I draw the line. Mm-hmm.
And what are some common like misinterpretations that you think people make from setting limits and boundaries, or from the lack of setting limits or boundaries?
Yeah, well, I think culturally speaking, I think, I see a lot of the Hispanic community. I think because of cultural aspects, family, that loyalty to family, like, oh, I don't want to make them feel bad. And, oh, they're going to get very upset at me. And I think it comes also from childhood, how you were raised. If you weren't, if you didn't have a voice and power to speak up, right? Because I think culturally, and this could be applied to different cultures, I
To
think.
ethnic communities.
Right, that you don't speak up to elders. I think that's changed, but before, from what I hear, my family's Mexican, that you couldn't even look up. Like kids were not allowed to be in a space where adults were. And so I think if you grow up thinking like, I just shouldn't use my voice, then that doesn't resolve itself and it carries on to adulthood.
Right. It's like you carry, like you didn't get a chance to foster that side of you, right? Of like speaking
Right.
up or being attuned to your needs. And therefore you can't express it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You can, or validate it, right? Stand up for it. And so then it becomes problematic.
Right. Or even if you didn't grow up feeling safe, right? It wasn't a safe place. Also, depending on the attachment that, happened or didn't happen, then, there's no sense of safety to be able to say that something happened or that you don't like something from child to all the way to adulthood.
Yes. And sometimes some people are able to like set limits maybe at work, right? And but then it becomes hard to do it when it comes to close relationships.
Right.
Why do you think, like with intimate partners, right, or with parents or with family? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think, it comes down to, again, this whole like how you grew up, the family of origin, like because your brain gets wired from, the moment you're a child to adulthood. And so I think also not having a good self-esteem, not being able to be assertive, right? Being afraid also that, people aren't going to like me. Sometimes there's a lot of people pleasing where you just don't want to say anything, don't want to upset anyone. But really, I mean, we're never going to please everyone. And that's a reality. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that we do in therapy, right? As therapists, we help people heal, walk this journey where they can also look at, those things and really be able to find their voice.
Yes. And so when it comes to that, right, guiding people to find their voice, how do you what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, first of all, I think people really have to get to a point of having self awareness that, there's some things that I don't like about my life, or even understanding that maybe they had a traumatic childhood or something that happened that is making them unhappy, that they see that they're not able to make decisions, and that they decide that they want to live a more fulfilling life and they want to heal.
Yeah. And sometimes yeah, I think that's the first step, right? The awareness and being attuned to one's needs, right? And sometimes yeah, growing up without the lack of like your voice matters and your voice counts leaves us wanting to, like you said, right, like please others and prioritize others versus prioritizing yourself and what you want. And sometimes we go from now, right, through social media, we know a lot about empowerment and so how can setting boundaries become a source of empowerment?
Yeah, well, I think when we are able to or learn to use our voice, we're able to feel safe and put a stop to things that are harming us, right? Like you said, even in intimate relationships, I've worked with women that, are married and think that, it's okay for their partner, husband to be abusive. And they don't see it as abusive because, I'm in this committed relationship or married. And so, even in that context, it's important to have limits and boundaries and to have a voice.
Yes, and it goes for both, right? When women, men, heterosexual couples, like or gay lesbian couples, right? And because sometimes um I run a men's group and sometimes they're like, "Oh, but there's like high it's hard to please a woman." But they have they don't have the understanding of how even they are not setting limits with themselves or they are not setting limits with their partner, right? So there's a lack of understanding of what that looks like.
That's a good point, that it's not just one side, that's everybody. It applies to everybody. As you were speaking, what comes to mind is, even like in school, elementary school, where you have, those kids that are the leaders and everybody follows along. And, it's kind of a developmental thing. But what happens when, people continue that throughout their adulthood? You just kind of follow along. You don't have your own um, understanding and of what you want, of your own values, and that will guide you to make decisions of things that you want in your life.
And can you share a time, like in your personal life or in the work you do, where setting boundaries was empowering?
Yeah, I think one of the things, again, going back culturally speaking, there's that loyalty to family. So I think I find it in general, some of my clients that have a hard time setting those limits with like parents because, oh, I just need to help my parents. And, sometimes these parents are not safe and healthy people. And so they just have a hard time. But I think when we get past that and we work on, it's important to name it. It's not about I'm pointing fingers and they're bad people. And sometimes it happens, like, people make bad choices,
Yes.
right? And they want to purposely be harmful. That's a different situation. But once, they're able to do that, and it's not a one-time thing. I think when you didn't grow up like that, your personality is not like that. It takes time to develop that, and it's not going to happen from one day to another. I know I was listening to something, and it was some therapists talking about how people, I think because of social media and that instant
Gratification.
gratification, people
Mhm.
think if I want to heal or I want to change this about me and, set limits, it's going to happen instantly. No,
Yes.
it's a whole process. And for those that, are going to therapy and working through that in therapy, um, it's not just, I don't know about you, what do you think? But I always tell my clients, we meet usually about 50 minutes a week, or
Right.
if they're in a group, might be a little different. It's important to do work beyond your session.
Yes.
And,
Understand.
I'm all about, treating the whole person, and your body's connected to your mind. So there's so many things that need to happen to really get to a healthy place.
Yes. And so, and I could tell you, like, for me, I guess a setting boundary, it would be like professionally. I remember when I started being a therapist, I had a session with a couple, and they would end up in a fight, and then we had to end session because that can happen. And then I would leave home worried about them and thinking like, what's gonna happen? So for me, setting boundaries with work was very important to my life. Like, it's okay, it just stays there. It's part of the job, and being able to transition to home, right? Because sometimes the limits are within ourselves. Like, we have to set limits with ourselves, and so that's something that I had to work through and like have understanding when I get home. Like, the people, that are saying hi, and they're saying hi. Like, I don't need to be rude with them, right? I still need to save some positivity and some energy to bring to my home and to my family.
Yeah, yeah, that's super important, because I think sometimes we think because we help out others, whether it's through our job
Yes.
or just,
Or
whatever we
other
do.
other industries, right? Like
Right.
customer service, like you give a
Yeah.
smile to everyone and you're like, "Hi," and talkative, and then
Yeah.
you come home and you're all grumpy.
Yeah. And, goes back to that self awareness, like really going on that journey of really knowing what our limits are, right? If you are an introvert or extrovert, people that are introverts, they replenish, they fill their cup by just being home, just watching a movie, being mellow.
Yeah.
While on the other side, extroverts, they fill their cup, being in social settings. And so knowing that about you is very empowering, especially then, if we talk about relationship, right? When one side of the spectrum, the other one's on
The
the other.
opposite.
So knowing that about you and the people around you, so that you're able to set your own limits and boundaries, but also respect others around you and their limits and boundaries.
And what language or phrases do you think people should use when they are trying to set a boundary?
Yeah. So using I statements. Yeah. Starts with hi.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes it's uncomfortable. I think I'll say that too, that when you haven't been that person, you people pleaser, and then you're moving on to being assertive. You want to start with I, and knowing too that some people are not going to take it well. Like, what happened? You've always helped me, right? Why are you being mean now? And accepting that sometimes, some people are not going to be okay with that, and that's okay as long as you're feeling safe and that that's the right thing for you.
Yes. And I always say, like, the tone, right? It's different if I use an angry tone versus if I really use a caring tone or a tone that is going to create connection with
But
your
also
loved
assert
ones
your
and assert.
assertiveness,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That, if you're like, oh, well, a little voice, but if you're
Yes.
like, okay, you're not screaming, but you're being firm, like, this is what I want, then I think, someone will take you more serious, like parenting. I would tell parents, you have to find that balance of, your when it's fun time and lovey time, huggy, there's a different tone of voice. But when you need to remind them of those limits and boundaries or rules, there's got to be
Yes.
another
Has to
tone of
match.
voice.
It has to
Right.
match
Exactly.
the tone. And what do you think how about when other people may, someone trying to hold a boundary may find like resistance or guilt tripping or other ways to manipulate them to change. How do you think someone can hold a boundary in those instances?
Yeah, I think, at the beginning, like I said, it depends on the person. If they've never done that, then they're probably gonna regress and take a step back, like, oh, I don't want to upset. But I think the more you do it, and I was reading something about setting limits and boundaries, how one of the tips was prepare what you're gonna say. So at the moment you're not taken off guard, that you kind of come with a little script in mind of, okay, this is what I'm going to say, and be consistent too. Also, if, one day you set the limit and then the next day you're kind of like flexible about it, and then, you change your mind, you want to, set it again, that too, that's important consistency, right? And really being clear about your message.
Yes, and provide a brief explanation, right, of the because the I statement, like
Right.
I'm feeling right overwhelmed, and then give your explanation, or this is what I need, right? And sometimes, what I find is that in therapy, that sometimes clients say, "But if I say it, then he or she's only doing it because I said it." And so I always say, like, yeah, and it matters what you say, right? So sometimes we like devalue what we want, and we express or we expect others to hold those boundaries even though they don't know that we need a boundary or that we need a limit.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to that self-esteem and that assertiveness, right? That and knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable, but if this is what I really want, to be consistent and keep reminding the person and sometimes accepting that friendships or some relationships will have to end, and that's okay. If there's someone that's not respecting you, that's harming you, that you just not feeling safe around, it's okay to walk away.
Yes. And I think, like it's also important, right? When you hold a boundary, you're validating yourself, right? You're validating your emotions. And that's something that we need to take ownership. And I think that's part of what empowerment comes from, like, right?
Yeah.
Feeling secure in what you want and being able to express it.
Yeah. And I think also knowing that when we speak of limits and boundaries, it could be something very small to something very severe, right? Where, I like my cups to stay here, and please don't move them around, right? To, domestic violence. People are in these domestic violence
Hmm.
situations where if the person doesn't stop, then, the person has to call the police, something like that, right? To
Yes.
ensure safety. So there are these
This
extremes,
is like a
right?
spectrum of boundaries. And sometimes we go black and white, right? We think that nope, I'm gonna say no to that, and then we build a wall,
And
and
become rigid.
and become rigid. So
Right.
how do we have that awareness of like setting boundaries and limits, and then not being rigid, not creating a wall?
Yeah, I think I keep going back to that self-awareness and knowing, how do you want your life to look? Because I think when we go to the
The
extreme of
extreme.
being rigid, you've been hurt. So of course you're going to, do everything to protect yourself. But what happens, people end up depressed, isolated because they don't have relationships. And just because people in your own family or around you hurt you doesn't mean everyone's going to hurt you. It's hard, right? And that's why it's important to seek out professional help, not just, I'm going to go with my friend. And, it's nice to get support, but sometimes we don't get good advice from others or even from just like the internet. There's a lot of
Yes.
things that are great out there, but everyone has an individual journey. And so that's the beauty of being in therapy where, your therapy gets tailored to what you need.
Yes, and yes, it's important to have someone else, right? To bring out like, are you rigid now, right? Do we go from no boundaries to like a wall? Now you have a wall that we gotta deconstruct now, right? And so, how do you think also setting boundaries can deepen intimacy, can deepen the bond between partners and between family members?
Yeah, I think, also with setting limits, also letting them know what you do want. Right. And there, I think what comes to mind is look like the love languages, right? Knowing what your love language is and knowing not just what I don't like, but what I do like, right? In order to live a fulfilling, happy life.
Yes, and in the work you do in shifting, clients from not having boundaries or not being able to set limits or not even having the awareness, right, that they do need to set boundaries and limits. What do you think the shift is? Like, how do you guide them to shift into empowering them to have a voice or to figure out what their voice is.
Yeah, I think it takes a while, because I feel like some adults, even from children to adults, I've asked, "How do you feel? Tell me." They describe everything but the feeling. So if you are not in tune of, what you're feeling, what you want, then, how do you expect others to treat you, or how do you make decisions that of things that you truly want?
Yes, and I think, yeah, you have to, first figure out what your voice is. Sometimes I ask the question, yeah, how do you want to live life? And people don't know. They have no idea what they want to have in life, right?
Right. And I think that's the really cool thing about therapy is that we do set therapeutic goals. So we're not just sitting and chatting, that we come up with these goals of things that the person actually wants to get better or attain or whatever it may be, and that we support them in that journey.
Yes, and it's I always say it's like a flower, right? That you get to see bloom. The beauty of the work we do is to see clients really, bloom. And obviously, it's at their own time, right? So it's not a switch. It doesn't happen from one day to the other. It's like little by little.
Yeah, it's not a Instagram like, or
Yeah,
it takes a
exactly.
while. Yeah, it may take months, years, and it may take, one moment in my life I go to therapy, and then, 3 years later I go again, so it's healing, it's a
Yes.
work in progress, I think, till the last day we live.
Yeah. And we can practice setting limits alone, right? So we do need connections to heal, right? We do need other people in our lives.
Yeah, but I think it's key that we begin with ourselves. Like even with just social media, it's wonderful, right? We can do so much with it, but also sometimes when we look at how much time we're spending, sometimes it's a little too much. So if we don't have control and set limits and boundaries for ourselves, doing that with others, it's probably going to be a lot more complicated. So I think starting with ourselves is important.
And what's one small step someone listening today could take towards setting healthy boundaries and limit?
Yeah, I think taking a moment to reflect, whether that's journaling, praying for some people, and just thinking about where am I in life? Where is it that I need to change or improve, heal, and then make decisions? There's a lot of self help books, there's a lot of podcasts I
Right?
can listen to.
Continue listening to Session and
Yeah, just
Secrets.
yeah, a lot of good things out there. Workshops, groups, and of course, individual therapy. There's couples therapy, family therapy. So there's a lot of tools that you can use. Yes, it's good to read on the internet, and there may
Yes.
be tips and things, but there's nothing like going to see a professional and really doing your own work.
Yes. Don't have that conversation just with your own self. Have it with a
Right.
with a professional.
Exactly.
And if you could tell someone or if you could rewrite the cultural, aspect or the cultural influence that boundaries have, like what do you think that would be?
I think people really understanding to give space to others. Like I provide faith-based therapy, so a lot of people seek me out because of faith-based. I think, I always go to if God gives us freedom, like who are we to not give others freedom? And I think, whether people are believers or not, knowing that, right, that, we should give others freedom to make their own choices, right? And, a lot of times culturally, everybody wants us there at that party, it's so important.
Right.
And it can be very helpful. We are culturally speaking, collectivistic community, right? The Hispanic community. But sometimes, someone might need to study for a test and they, can't be there. And, how do we move from guilt tripping and being upset to being happy for others and their decisions and celebrating them, whether it's something we may not be in agreement with?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. You're right. Accepting, right? Accepting the differences and learning to love the strengths and accept the weaknesses, right?
Right. Mhm.
And well, Doctor, is there, so what's the secret of setting boundaries?
Secret of setting boundaries is really the person makes the decision that, they want to live differently, right? Once you make that decision, I mean, all these doors will open.
Yes. Yes.
Not an
Right.
easy path, right, to take, to embark on, but one that will bring so much joy and fulfillment in your life.
Yes. And if, well, thank you very much for being here with us today in Session and Secrets. And if someone wants to contact you, where can they contact you?
Yeah, sure. They can call me at 213-260-0647 or email me at Taide, Taid, at katerimentalhealth.com.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to Session and Secrets today.
Subscribe.